Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Ezekiel Class. We are currently in class number 32, and we finished Ezekiel chapter 37 last week. This week we're not actually going to be studying, we're not going to be starting 38 yet because we need to get some basic stuff underneath us before we go into chapter 38. Chapter 38 and 39 is the Gog and Magog War. And the Gog and Magog War, we're going to talk about it next week as to when exactly it happened. But one of the questions that's going to come up as we get into it is, how is it possible during the millennial kingdom, this period when everything is so beautiful and seems to be so perfect, when Jesus is ruling the world, when everybody who gets in there is saved, how is it possible that we could have a revolt at the end of this period? And to do that, we really need to get into some stuff that's going to get a little complicated today. We need to get into the question of who's going to be in the millennial kingdom and what's their status, their nature going to be during that period, and who are the leaders going to be during that period. So that's what we're going to get into today. We're going to start by looking at the leaders during the millennial kingdom, and that's over here. The first leader, of course, we're going to look at is Christ. At the end of Revelation chapter 19, Jesus comes back to earth. The tribulation is over. He brings it to an end. He comes back to earth. And one of the first things he does is he judges those who helped his people, and he judges those who hurt his people during the tribulation. That is in Matthew 25, and that is the sheep and the goats judgment. So he separates the Gentiles who are left in the world at that point into the sheep on his right hand and the goats on his left hand, those who helped his people during the tribulation and those who opposed his people during the tribulation, or who didn't help them. He does some other things. He repairs the damage that was done to the earth during the tribulation. That is from Daniel chapter 12, by the way. And then he establishes the millennial kingdom, and he reigns and rules on earth for 1,000 years. And he's going to reign and rule from Jerusalem, actually from a new temple that's going to be built. That one, by the way, comes from Revelation 20. I'm actually going to read you that verse here. That is Revelation 20, verse 4. I saw thrones on which were seated those who had been given authority to judge, that would be us. And I saw the souls of those who were beheaded because of their testimony for Jesus and because of the word of God. They had not worshipped the beast or his image and had not received the mark on their foreheads. Those are all the people that we're going to talk about in the first group here as we get into this. They came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. So Christ is going to reign on earth for 1,000 years. And he's going to reign with the assistance of this first group over here that we'll talk about. And that is with people with imperishable bodies. People who have already received their new eternal body will be helping him to reign and rule during that period. Hopefully that will include everyone here in this room. I hope and pray that it will include everyone who's watching us online as well. By the way, for those of you watching us online, welcome this morning. We are delighted to have you here with us today. So Jesus is going to reign and rule. He's going to reign and rule from a new temple that's going to be built in Jerusalem. We haven't come to that yet, but we will in a few weeks. That temple is going to be in Ezekiel chapters 40 through 48. And Jesus will actually be reigning and ruling from a place called the Most Holy Place, which is in that new temple that will be built in Jerusalem. So Jesus is going to be the king during that period. The second person we're going to talk about is David. David will be, as we're going to see in a few minutes, David will be in an imperishable body at that point because he is an Old Testament saint. He will be in an imperishable body. And David will be assisting Jesus. He will be the prince. When we get to the temple, we're going to find out that his office is right outside of Jesus's, right outside of where Jesus is in the temple. So he will be responsible for being the leader of the Jews. The Jews were promised in the Old Testament that David will be back. He will be back, and he will be their prince. We've seen, as we look through Ezekiel 34, we saw Jesus was the king and David is the prince. As we saw again in chapter 37 of Ezekiel, we saw the same thing. So Ezekiel will be back and he will be the prince during that period. Next person I want to talk about is Satan. Satan gets thrown into the abyss right at the end of the tribulation, and Satan will actually be chained up in there for the entire 1,000 years. So Satan will not be anywhere around during that 1,000-year period. Let me read you that passage. That is Revelation chapter 20, verse 3. He, that would be the angel, he, threw him, that would be Satan, into the abyss and locked and sealed it over him to keep him from deceiving the nations any more until the 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be set free for a short time. So Satan gets bound up at the end of the tribulation by the angel. He is thrown into the abyss. The abyss is inside the earth, and then it's sealed over, so he can't get out. So he has no influence at all on earth during the 1,000 years. What a world, right? We're going to have 1,000 years where Satan is not going to be there. He's not going to be influencing anybody during a 1,000-year period. So the key leader of evil is not around during that period. He is going to be in the abyss for the entire 1,000 years. Sounds like things ought to be perfect, right? And they sort of are, but not quite. We'll get to the rest of that soon. The other leaders, the leaders that are coming out of the tribulation, are the beast and the false prophet, and they are going straight to the lake of fire. The lake of fire is the eternal hell, if you will, and they will go straight into there. As we see, Satan's going to end up in there eventually too, but that will be later on. But they will go straight into the lake of fire at that point. So they will be gone as well. The people who caused the problems during the tribulation will all be gone from the world as well. So again, sounds like a pretty idyllic world. And one of the questions we're trying to get into here is, in an idyllic world, how can there be opposition to Jesus? That's something Dean and I were just talking about beforehand. So we're going to get into that today. Questions about leadership before I move on. I want to move on to talking about the people next, but questions about the leaders during the millennial kingdom, where they are and what they're doing. Okay, let's move on now to who's going to be there. And I'm going to separate it into three groups. Those that are saved and in imperishable bodies, those that are saved and in perishable bodies, those that are not saved and in perishable bodies, and then there's a fourth group we'll talk about, those that are dead, those who are out of the picture. So we'll talk about those as we go through and where they all come from, because it's important to understand where all these folks are coming from in order to understand how we can have a revolt against Christ during the millennial kingdom. So let's start with people that are saved and in imperishable bodies. We'll find out as we go through that these people cannot have children. Once you're in an imperishable body, you cannot have children. So we will find out as we go through this, and I'll get to that in a few minutes, how that they cannot have children. So these people come from 5 different places in the Bible. The first one is church-era saints who have died. And that comes from, change pages here. At the rapture, two groups of people will receive their imperishable bodies at the rapture. The first is church-era saints who have died, and this is from 1 Thessalonians 4:15 through 17. I'll read you that passage. According to the Lord's own words, we tell you that we who are still alive, this is another group now, who are left till the coming of the Lord, will certainly not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet call of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. So the dead in Christ are the first group to get their imperishable body. After that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will be with the Lord forever. Therefore, encourage each other with these words. So, at the rapture, 2 groups of people are going to get their imperishable bodies, their eternal bodies. One of them, the first one to get them, will be church-era saints who have died, and they will be risen, and they will get new bodies. The second group to get them will be church-era saints who are alive at that point in time, who will be raptured at that point in time. And they will also get their imperishable bodies. They will meet Jesus in the air, so they will come right up off the earth somehow, meet Jesus in the air, and get their imperishable bodies at that point. So those 2 groups will be the first 2 to get their imperishable bodies. And by the way, there is one other group that will have them before that. There is a very small group who rose with Jesus. If you go back to Matthew 27, verse 52 and 53, actually, let me go find that for you. This is right as Jesus dies. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook and the rocks split. The tombs broke open, and the bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs, and after Jesus' resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many people. Now, it doesn't tell us exactly who these people are. It says they are holy people, so they are saved people, obviously. Most experts believe that these are the bodies of people who accepted Christ during his public ministry and then subsequently died before he died. That's the most commonly accepted explanation. There are others, but that would be the most commonly accepted explanation. Probably the one person that we know for sure would be in that group would be John the Baptist, right? John the Baptist clearly accepted Christ, and the Bible clearly tells us he died during that period. There were many others who accepted Christ, the leper, the woman at the well, a number of others who, and some of them may have died during that period. It's been 3.5 years. We have to assume some number of people died. So most experts believe that this group that's being talked about here in Matthew 27 is that group of people who accepted Christ while he was on earth during his public ministry, and then died subsequently, but died before Jesus died. That's probably what that group is. So that would be a group that would be in heaven. It's a very small group, maybe, I don't know, a couple hundred people, whatever, no idea. But some small group would be in there as well. Questions on that? Next group would be Old Testament saints. Old Testament saints would be people who walked with the Lord during the Old Testament. We see that phrase very commonly throughout the Old Testament, that they walked with the Lord. We saw it with a bunch of people during that period. So people who walked with the Lord during the Old Testament but didn't have access to the grace that Christ brought have to be someplace. Now the Bible uses the term Abraham's bosom. That's probably where they were. There's some dispute on that, but that's probably where they were kept during that period. But those people will get their eternal bodies as well, their imperishable bodies as well. I'm sorry. Let me talk first about what an imperishable body is. That comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 15. So before we get into Old Testament saints, let me spend a few minutes on what an imperishable body actually is. And that is from 1 Corinthians 15, verses 50 through 55. I declare to you, brothers, that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, nor does the perishable inherit the imperishable. So he's talking here about, well, we all know perishable groceries, right? Things that are going to fall apart if you don't eat them pretty quickly. The perishable and the imperishable. Listen, I tell you a mystery. We will not all sleep. I'm sorry? Oh, okay. Listen, I tell you a mystery. We will not all sleep, but we will all be changed. In a flash, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, the dead will be raised imperishable. This is what we just read in 1 Thessalonians. The dead will be raised imperishable, and we will all be changed. For the perishable must clothe itself with the imperishable, and the mortal with immortality. When the perishable has been clothed with the imperishable, and the mortal with immortality, then the saying that is written will come true. Death has been swallowed up in victory. Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? So that's talking about how at the rapture, or anything, that is talking about getting your imperishable body. And it will happen at the rapture for this group. It happened for this group when Jesus died and then rose. We'll look in a minute at where it happens for this group, the Old Testament saints. The Old Testament saints haven't got theirs yet. They actually get theirs later. They get it at the time that Israel is converted, which is at the Battle of Jerusalem. After Jesus returns on that final battle, some people call it the Battle of Armageddon. It's in Revelation chapter 19. At that point is when Israel gets converted. We went through that 2 weeks ago. I have the whole thing up here on the board of how the conversion of Israel occurs. So when that all happens, that is when the Old Testament saints come out of the tomb and get their imperishable bodies. So how do we know that? We find that in a bunch of places. We find it in Daniel chapter 12, verses 1 through 2. We find it in Isaiah 26:19. And we find it in Isaiah 26:13 through 18. So let me look at Daniel first. At that time, Michael, the great prince who protects your people, will arise. There will be a time of distress such as has not happened from the beginning of nations until then. But at that time, your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered. That is the conversion of Israel. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake. So this is going to happen at the same time. The Old Testament saints who are sleeping in the dust, who have walked with God in the Old Testament. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. So that's going to happen at that point in time. Let's look next at Isaiah. This is Isaiah 26 we're going to go to next. And I'm going to start with verse 19, then I'm going to come back to 13 and 18 after that. This is Isaiah 26:19. But your dead will live. This is talking to the Jews now. Your dead will live. Their bodies will rise. You who dwell in the dust, wake up and shout for joy. Your dew is like the dew of the morning. The earth will give birth to her dead. So this is talking about the rebirth with a new body of the Old Testament saints. Okay, and it's going to happen at a time we'll look at in a minute. That is in Isaiah 26:13 through 18. So let's look at that next. O Lord our God, other lords beside you have ruled over us, but your name alone do we honor. They are now dead, they live no more. Those departed spirits do not rise. You punished them and brought them to ruin. You wiped out all memory of them. So those people are not going to rise with an imperishable body if they weren't with the Lord. You have enlarged the nation, O Lord. You have enlarged the nation. You have gained glory for yourself. You have extended all the borders of the land. Lord, they came to you in distress. When you disciplined them, they could barely whisper a prayer. As a woman with a child and about to give birth writhes and cries out in her pain, so were we in your presence, O Lord. We were with child, we writhed in pain, but we gave birth to wind. We have not brought salvation to the earth. We have not given birth to the people of the world. So, and that goes along with verse 19, which I'll read again for you now. But your dead will rise, their bodies will rise. Your dead, the people who are with you, will rise. Their bodies will rise. You who dwell in the dust, wake up and shout for joy. Your dew is like the dew of the morning. The earth will give birth to her dead. So the point at which this happens is the point at which Israel accepts Christ. And as we said, that is the point at the end of the tribulation when Jesus comes back and rescues Jerusalem. That is the point at which the Old Testament saints will get their bodies and rise. Now there's one last group that will enter with imperishable bodies into the millennial kingdom. That is the tribulation saints. These are people, most of them have been martyred during the tribulation. Actually, let me back up a bit. Understand that going into the tribulation, after the rapture, there's nobody on earth that knows Jesus, right? Nobody on earth is committed to Jesus after the rapture. Well, people will begin to change, slowly but surely. There'll be a number of things going on. The Lord's going to give us 144,000 supernaturally converted Jews. He's going to give us 2 witnesses that are going to be in Jerusalem. The Lord's going to give us a bunch of things to help us with this. But people themselves will begin to understand, and will begin to look, and they will begin to convert. It will be the greatest conversion period in history. During that period, huge numbers of people will come to Christ. Most of them will be martyred. That's something we don't understand. The scriptures make that pretty clear in Revelation. During my Revelation class, it said repeatedly in there that most of them are going to be martyred. So there's a good reason to come to Christ today, right? If you come to Christ today, you get raptured if he comes back soon and you get out of here, or if you die, you're ready to go. But the people who don't come to Christ today, the people who wait until the tribulation period, first of all, there's going to be a lot of death there. They may not get a chance again. But if they do get a chance, the chances are they will also be martyred. So understand that if you wait until the tribulation period to accept Christ, you may very well end up getting martyred. That's not bad in the long run. In the long run, if you get martyred, you're now a tribulation saint. There will probably be some tribulation saints who are not martyred, but as we read through the book of Revelation, most of the people who do accept Christ will be martyred during the tribulation. So those people will get their eternal bodies as well. They get them in a different place. Let me point that out to you. That is in Revelation chapter 20, verse 2. We haven't looked at that one yet. Let's take a look at that. Revelation chapter 20, verse 4. I saw thrones on which were seated those who had been given authority to judge, and I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded because of their testimony for Christ and because of the word of God. So that is the tribulation saints. They had not worshipped the beast or his image and had not received his mark on their foreheads or on their hands. They came to life, so they come to life at this point right here in Revelation 24. They came to life and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. So they're going to be reigning with Christ 1,000 years as well. So this is the point at which they come to life. It is at the point just as the millennial kingdom is beginning, because it says Christ is going to reign for 1,000 years. So these are the people who are in the millennial kingdom in imperishable bodies, in 1 Corinthians 15 bodies. These are the people. Now, what's going to be happening with them? They're going to help Jesus rule and reign during that period. Now, initially, we're going to be the majority in there. There's not going to be a lot of other people in there besides the people that are here in this group. This is going to be the majority. So we're going to help rule and reign. Why does he need millions and millions and millions and millions of us to help rule and reign a relatively small number of people? The answer is these people are having children, and pretty soon we're going to find out there's no death going on, so the population is going to explode during this 1,000-year period. So over time, the number of people that we have to help bring to Jesus during that period will be increasing dramatically over that period. And our job is going to be to help Jesus, as it said in Revelation we just read, reign and rule during that period, to help him get those people into him. An interesting point, I'm going to say it for the first time here, but I'm going to keep saying it today. The way we get to Jesus is by accepting him. We have to make a choice in our lives. That's the reason we're here. We can either accept Jesus and be with him forever, or we can not accept Jesus and be without him forever. That's the choice that we face. The people who are born, everybody who comes into the tribulation has already made that choice. We'll talk about these people in a minute. Everybody who comes into the tribulation has already made that choice and has chosen Jesus. But the people born during the tribulation do not automatically have that choice made for them. They still have to make that choice themselves. They are born in sin and in natural bodies, just like we are. So they will have to make that choice themselves during the tribulation. I'm going to keep coming back to that point today, because that is ultimately the source of why there can be a rebellion against Jesus in the Gog and Magog war during the tribulation. So let's get to the next group now. These are people who are at the end of the tribulation are still alive. They're not dead, and they're not in imperishable bodies. They are still alive in their old natural bodies. These people have accepted Christ, and they will move into the millennial kingdom. Every single one of them will move into the millennial kingdom. Every one of these groups. And they will be able to still have children. Before I get into the children part, let's talk about who they are. First of all, remember at the midpoint of the tribulation, a bunch of Jews go out of Jerusalem, go out into the desert, go up into the mountains, and we know from the scriptures they go to a place called Bozrah. There are a lot of thoughts about where Bozrah is. It's not on the maps today, but there are a lot of thoughts about where it may be on the maps today. But they go to a place called Bozrah where they are supernaturally protected by God for the last 3.5 years. So these people are Jews, they have accepted Christ, and they have gotten out of Dodge, and they are out in the desert being supernaturally protected by Jesus. And for 3.5 years they will be there, and they will be alive at the end of the tribulation, and they will come into the millennial kingdom, but they will come in perishable bodies. The second is the group we've talked about already. That is Jews who are still alive in Jerusalem at the time of the Battle of Jerusalem, the Battle of Armageddon. Those Jews who lived through that will all be supernaturally converted. We went through that whole process a few weeks ago up here on the board. Remember that was up here. We went through the whole process of how during that battle they will be supernaturally converted while Jesus is standing on the Mount of Olives. That will happen. The third group is Gentile sheep. After Jesus comes back, we have the sheep and the goats judgment. Jesus will separate out the sheep, the people who supported his people, who took care of them, who helped them. That would be Jews and Gentile believers, the people who helped them, and the goats, the people who didn't want anything to do with it, left them, didn't take care of his people during the tribulation. The Gentile sheep are saved. Now, the interesting piece here to think about, by this point in the tribulation, so many of the believers have been martyred and are gone, that where did they get their information from? How did they get information about Jesus to make that decision for him? And what we're seeing in Matthew 25 is this particular group may not have the kind of information that we have to be able to make that decision. So what Jesus is going to look for in this group is, how did they treat his people? Remember at Matthew 25, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was in jail, you visited me. This particular group, Jesus will give a little extra option to, and the option is during that last days when there was nobody around talking about him, did they take care of his people? Those are the Gentile sheep that are from the sheep and the goats judgment. Now, we said these people will be having children. Remember, as we've talked about the millennial kingdom so far, we know there is no death in the millennial kingdom except for one thing, and that is unbelievers who don't accept Christ by their 100th birthday. We went through all that a few weeks ago in here. So there is no death in the millennial kingdom. There's really no disease left anymore in the millennial kingdom. Children are not dying in childhood diseases. None of that is happening. There's plenty of food. The Lord is providing all kinds of food for us. There's great water. The Lord is providing everything we need during this period to support maximum life. Well, it's possible that people in that era, oh, by the way, people are living 1,000 years. Are they going to stop having children after 35 during that period? I don't know. The Bible doesn't make that real clear. It's possible. Maybe the Lord's going to change that. Maybe people will be able to have 50 children during that period. We don't know. That information's not in the Bible. But at a minimum, people will be able to have the number of children they can have today, but not have them die, not have to worry about how they're going to feed them, not have to worry about whether they're going to have the money to educate them. All of that stuff is not going to be important to people in those days. So I think we can assume that rather than having 1.66 children per family, like most families have today, that most families will probably have more than that during this period. They will be in a position where they can have more than that, and where they're bringing them into a beautiful, beautiful world. So why wouldn't they have more children? It seems likely that they would, right? Seems likely. And if women are still able to have children after age 35 in that period, and if they're going to live to be 1,000, maybe women can have children that late in life. I don't know. Who knows? Population may be exploding. Ladies, you may have 50 children in those days. Who knows? Maybe the pains of labor will be less during that period. That's not specifically covered in the Bible, so maybe having children might be simple and easy. Anyway, my point is the population will be rising dramatically in the world during that period. The population of children, of saved people, will be rising dramatically during that period. Most people don't realize that. I said we're going to be a majority in the beginning, but pretty soon we're going to be the minority, and we're going to have a lot of people we're going to have to work with to bring to Christ. A lot of new children coming into the world who have not accepted Christ yet. We are going to have a lot of people to work with. That's going to be one of our key jobs in the millennial kingdom. As people with imperishable bodies, our job is going to be to work with them to get them committed to Christ, to get them to accept Christ during that period. Now, we read the passage a few weeks ago from, let me go find it again, hang on. From Isaiah 65:20, we read the passage that children must accept Christ before their 100th birthday, or else they will die on their 100th birthday. So these children that are born in the millennial kingdom will have 100 years. Hopefully us working with them will get many of them to accept Christ, but they'll have 100 years to accept Christ. If they do, then they are then saved. And at that point, they are this group. They are children who accept Jesus by age 100. They are saved, which means they're going to be with Christ forever, even after the millennial kingdom. So that group is going to be saved. We'll talk in a minute about those who don't accept Christ by their 100th birthday. Now, there's one other group we haven't talked about, and that is Jewish children. And remember, Jews, every Jew who came into everybody who came into the millennial kingdom is saved. By definition, you don't get into the millennial kingdom unless you're saved, unless you've accepted Christ. We went through the passages last week that talked about how Jewish children may be different because of the covenant that Israel has with the Lord, which is a national covenant. There are a number of verses in the scriptures, and I'm not sure I have time to go through them this morning. I went through some of them last week with you, but I'll just recite them for you. Jeremiah 24:7, Jeremiah 50:19 through 20, Ezekiel 11:19 through 20, Ezekiel 36:24 through 25, and Zephaniah 3:9 through 13. There are a number of passages in the Bible that lead us to believe that perhaps Jewish children may have a special blessing during the millennial kingdom. The Jewish children who are born may have already been born accepting Christ because of the national covenant that God has with Israel. Possible that that's true. There's a lot of debate on that. I'm not taking a firm position one way or the other up here, but understand that many experts who are reading those passages are coming to the conclusion that Jewish people, Jewish children born during the millennial kingdom will have an extra special thing that Gentile children will not have, and that is that they will not have to make a decision for Christ because their nation has already made that decision for Christ at the time that the nation accepted Christ, which we talked about. So it's very possible the Jewish children will not have to accept Christ by age 100. Possible. Now, before I move on, any questions about this group or about anything we've talked about so far before we get to the people over in the next group?
So the Jewish children come from the two at the top of the list, right? Jews from
Correct.
Israel,
The Jewish children, every Jew who enters the millennial kingdom is saved already because of one of these two. Either they were saved at the midpoint and they were in Bozrah, or they were saved at the Battle of Jerusalem, Battle of Armageddon, and they were from Jerusalem. So every Jew coming in is saved. They will have children because they're in natural bodies, they're still alive. So their Jewish children may very well be saved just by virtue of the national covenant that the Lord has with Israel. Maybe, maybe not. My instinct is I think they are, but you will find people out there who think differently. Okay? Other questions? Okay, let's now get into the last group of people who are alive. Let me talk out here. First of all, there are a whole group of people that aren't going into the millennial kingdom at all. And basically, everybody who did not accept Christ is not going in. And obviously your demons and your fallen angels are not going in. So there are a whole group of people that are never going to see the millennial kingdom. They're going to a whole different place. They're going into the abyss. And eventually after the abyss, they're going to the great white throne judgment where Jesus will give them their fate. And their fate is in the lake of fire. So there is that whole group out here. And anybody who got to the end of their life and did not accept Jesus is in that group over there. Now let's look at this last group here. And this is the group that is the most problematic here. These are people who are born, who are children, born during the millennial kingdom. So none of these people came into the millennial kingdom. They were all born during the millennial kingdom. They are all Gentile children, and they have to make a decision for Christ, just like we do. We don't get out of this life without making a decision for Christ or not making a decision for Christ. That's our choice. They have the same choice. That does not change during the millennial kingdom. You don't get out of this life without making that choice. And if you make no choice, that is a choice. That is one of those two choices. Same thing here. They have to accept Christ. We studied that section. Let me go back to that section again that we looked at a couple of weeks ago, which was in Isaiah 65:20. Let me go back to that section again. We studied it in detail a few weeks ago. Never again will and he's talking about the millennial kingdom now. Never again will there be in it, that's the millennial kingdom, an infant who lives but a few days, so there'll be no death of children. An old man who does not live out his years, so anybody who gets to be 100 will live for the full 1,000 years of the millennial kingdom. He who dies at 100 will be thought a mere youth, so anybody who's under 100 is still a child. Anybody who's over 100 is a mature, believing, saved Christian. He who fails to reach 100 will be considered accursed. So those who don't make their 100th birthday are cursed. They are going over to here. They're done. They will die on their 100th birthday. So that's this group here is children that are born in the millennium, that are Gentiles, that are born in the millennial kingdom, and that have not accepted Christ. Now, the question is, actually I said by 100, and I meant to say that are under 100. Pardon me, I put the wrong word up there. So these are people that are under the age of 100 and that have not accepted Christ yet. This group, as we're going to study as we get into the sections on the Ezekiel's temple in chapters 40 through 48, we're going to find a number of things in there. We're going to find that, first of all, this group is required to come to the temple every year. They have to go there. And we're going to find when we get into that period, there are no trains, planes, cars, whatever. They're going to have to walk or ride a horse to get there. They're going to have to come to Jerusalem, and once a year they must go up to the temple during the Feast of Tabernacles. And we'll see that when we go, as we go through in the future here. And if they don't do that, they will get no rain on their crops. Pretty powerful incentive, right? They're going to starve if they don't come up once a year. So they're going to have a huge incentive. Not only will they have us out there explaining Christ to them and trying to work with them on that, but they're going to have a hammer as well, that if they don't accept Christ, for every year they don't accept Christ, they're not going to have rain over their crops. And they're going to have to go to Jerusalem. And when they go to Jerusalem, they won't have the same vision that we will. When we go to Jerusalem during that period, we'll be able to see Christ himself. They will not. They will not be allowed to see Christ during that period. So they won't actually see him, just like us today. They have a lot of this is so similar to our situation today. The people who are born and are in this situation won't be seeing Christ. They will have to come to faith based on faith. They won't be actually seeing Christ in the temple in Jerusalem. They're going to have to come to faith based on faith, just like us. They're going to be in the same situation. And every year they're going to have to go to the temple. When they go to the temple, they're not going to be allowed to see Christ. We'll see that as we look at the design of the temple later on. But they're not going to be allowed to see Christ. So they're going to have to accept him based on faith. So it's very similar to what we have. And they must accept him within that 100 years. If they don't accept him within that 100 years, then they will die on their 100th birthday. So let's think about where this is all leading us. And this is going to begin to lead us into what we're going to study next week. At the beginning of the millennial kingdom, everybody's saved. And then people start having children. And those children initially are a very tiny minority, and their parents are working with them. Their parents are all saved, and all of us in the imperishable bodies are working with them. Most of those people will get saved, but some won't. And during that 100 years, before they die, those people will bear children themselves. Right? Makes sense? So some of the people will bear children themselves, and those children will now be in a situation where their parents aren't working with them as much to get them saved. They still have a lot of us working with them, but they don't have quite the same level of influence over their lives that the first group have at the beginning of the millennial kingdom. Now you take that and you take the fact that over 1,000 years you've got, 30, 40, 50 generations of people. So you multiply that out times 30, 40, 50 generations, and if people are having more and more children to begin with, pretty soon that number of people that are under 100 and haven't accepted Christ yet becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. Is that making sense? And as you get down into those last 100 years, which is where we're going to go to next week, when we talk about Gog and Magog, as you get down into those last 100 years, you're going to have a situation where this group of people is going to be quite large. Probably a whole lot more than we are over here, right? This group of people is going to be quite large. A group of people that are under 100 and haven't made the decision for Christ yet. They've had generations ahead of them where their parents haven't made that decision, and they're having children, and their parents have had them. So it's possible that we can have, and we all know, if you accept Christ, you're his. If not, you're still in sin. So these people are still in sin. These people are still in sin. So sin will exist in the millennial kingdom. It won't exist initially when everybody's here is saved. At the very first day of the millennial kingdom, there'll be no sin. But over time, sin will build up and build up and build up and build up and build up. Now, Christ is still sitting on his throne, and he's still ruling, and we're still going to be helping him, and there's going to be millions of us helping him rule. So it's not like you're going to be able to form some, it's not like people are going to be able to get back into the massive, and by the way, Satan's gone during that period, so he's not doing anything. It's our own sinful bodies that are doing it during that period. If Satan is gone, it's our own sinful natures, our own sinful natural bodies that are creating this problem. And that problem will build and build and build and build during the time of the millennial kingdom, until by the time we get here to the final years of the millennial kingdom, which is where we're going to be talking next week. When we get to the final years of the millennial kingdom, sin could be pretty rampant in the world in certain places. Is that all making sense?
Well, would they all be under 100? That last 100 years of the millennium
Yeah.
is the only ones that would be alive
Right.
that are saved.
Everybody who is not accepted Christ at the time of the Gog and Magog war will have to be under 100. Yes, they will all have to be under
And you
100.
think that number could be really, really large?
I think that number could be immense. A lot depends on some things that we don't know the answers to because the Bible doesn't give them. How many children can a woman have in those eras? You know, if it goes from 1.66 that Americans are having today to 5, that number will grow slowly over time. If it goes to 50, that number will grow, boom, like a mushroom, right? So we don't know yet. We don't have enough information in the Bible to know how serious this problem will be. And by the way, the fact that the leaders aren't going to be over 100 is interesting too. So all the leaders will die off at 100 at that point in time. So it'll be hard to keep good leadership going in that period. The leaders will be very disorganized, as we're going to see when we get into chapter 38 and 39. The leaders are very disorganized. They don't know how to make war. They don't know how to make good weapons. There's a whole lot of things that are working against them being successful.
And they
in
can't
this.
even do it until Satan's released, right?
That's the trigger point. Yes, Satan
Okay,
is released
I'm
at the
getting
end of
it.
1,000 years.
Yeah.
At that point, the world changes again. Now we're back into Satan is out there again. And Satan's going to have his last fling in the world. Good questions. Any other questions as we?
At what age do they have to start going to the temple?
Good question. You mean, are children required at the age of 1 to go to the temple? It doesn't say in the Bible. I don't know the answer to
You know,
that.
if it's not gonna rain, their parents gonna have to take them.
Right.
And is
Yeah.
that the only reason they go to the temple? Is so it'll
Well,
rain?
no, they
They're
If
not
they-
required.
necessarily.
If they can't see Christ,
Right.
what other reason are they going to the temple other than to get rain?
You're getting way ahead of me here in the class. We're going to go into this one in a lot of detail in about a couple of months, about another month or two. We're going to go into this probably sometime in July. We're going to go into that subject.
And it's also possible that you don't have children until after 100, because he calls them mere children.
Yeah.
People before 100 are just mere children.
Right.
So they might not be.
Oh, maybe you can't even have a child until you're 100? that's
Why
that's a
else?
good point. You know, I had never thought of that. That is a very good point.
Why else
Maybe
would he
you
call them
can't.
mere children.
Yeah. If that's the case, then that tends to make this problem less than what I'm presenting it as, if that's the case. If you can't even have a child until you know you're saved, then that means that only saved people are having children.
Well, and if you were living 1,000 years, a woman could have a child every year. They could have 1,000.
What do you think about that, ladies?
Well,
Yeah.
we don't know what
See?
it's gonna be like.
Right, I know.
No
I'm
idea.
kidding, I'm sorry. I'm kidding. No, you're right. That was kind of part of my point earlier. Maybe women will have 50 children in the millennial kingdom. I have no idea. The Bible doesn't tell us how many children a woman can have during the millennial kingdom, or how late she'll be able to have children. We don't know. That's why we don't know how big this number will be. But we know that this is the number that can possibly produce rebellion against God, because these are people who are living in sin. They have not accepted Christ yet, which means their sinful body, their sinful nature is controlling them at that point. So we don't know how big this group is, but all we know is it keeps growing with each generation. That we know for sure.
Well, that's the part that it blows my mind, because first of all, Satan's not in the picture. Now, we have all these millions of witnesses who live 1,000 years, and it kind of parallels the situation today. I mean, we have the Bible, we have God's Word, the other thing too, Christ is with them during this period of time.
But they might not be able to see him. Okay, yes.
But yet, sin explodes.
It explodes late, yes.
Yes. Now that blows my mind. Because
But it's one of the things that we think. Again, there are theologians out there that have all kinds of views on this. But many theologians will argue that because Satan isn't here, that the sin will be internal, that your sin will be internal, that it won't be sinning against your neighbor. I don't know if that's true, but there are people out there that will argue that during this period, you'll have sinful desires, you may act on those sinful desires, but you won't be killing your neighbor, for example. You won't be committing sins against your neighbor. There are people that argue that. That may be true, that may not be true. I don't really know. The Bible doesn't tell us.
Except there's peace on the earth because of the Prince of Peace, so I agree with that.
Yeah.
That they will not, they'll have a sinful nature that will rebel at the end.
Right.
But they have to live under God's.
Right, yeah. If you start going out and killing your neighbor, there are plenty of us out there that are going to take care of you if you do that, right? There are plenty of us that are going to come in and correct you if you start doing that. Huh?
There is no death until 100 years old.
Right, that's right. Yeah, I guess, yeah, you can't go kill your
can't
neighbor.
kill
You can't kill
somebody.
your neighbor. I'm using something that's not correct.
Yeah.
You can't kill your neighbor. You can go steal from your neighbor, for example. That you could still do. But if you steal from your neighbor, I think some of us that are reigning and ruling out here are going to come down on you pretty quickly, I would imagine,
Yeah,
during that period.
I don't see it, yeah, I think that it's internal, it's all internal.
I tend to believe that as well. That's why I'm presenting that as a strong possibility here. my instinct is that during that period, with Satan gone, you'll still have internal sin, that you can still have desires going on inside of you, and that's all over the scriptures, that you can still have all kinds of desires going on inside of you, and you may be able to act on those, but not to the extent of affecting someone else. That's kind of how I think it'll go, but I'm not really sure. Other questions? This is complex stuff, but I needed to go through all this week, because next week when we get into the Gog and Magog war, you're going to be sitting there scratching your head saying, what? You know, we're in this perfect world. Why are people rebelling against Christ in this perfect world? So, and part of it is, as you say, right at the end of the 1,000 years, Satan gets released. So there's part of the answer right there. But the other part is he's got a ready group of people that are ready to be influenced by him when he gets released. So we're done here today. Unless there are any other questions, I got another minute if you have any more. Well, have a great time in church today, and have a blessed week with the Lord. All of you at home, thank you for joining us, and we pray that you will have a blessed week as well, and we look forward to seeing you again next week.